In Le Castellet, France, Circuit Paul Ricard sprawls over the French countryside. Considered one of the world's safest racing facilities by many, this 5.8-kilometer circuit has dozens of track layouts, providing drivers with challenges at every turn. Today's event, the third round of GT World Challenge America's GT Rivals Esports Championship, pitting some of the best sports car drivers in the world against sim racers from across the country. The race will run into the darkness, and as the sun sets, the intensity will rise in this 60-minute sports car event. Welcome to GT World Challenge America. My name's Kyle Heyer, joined by Ryan Marine, as we embark on another sprint race journey in Assetto Corsa Competizione. If daytime racing at Paul Ricard wasn't challenging enough, Ryan, we're going to run it into the darkness. And it's going to be a whole lot of fun tonight.
It sure should be. Hey, thank you very much, Kyle. Thanks so much to all of you for tuning in. This ought to be a blast. It's a unique racetrack, a challenging racetrack, a nice mix of different types of corners, and that one massive straightaway down the backstretch here at Paul Ricard leads to a lot of drafting, a lot of overtaking opportunities. Really looking forward to seeing what the stars and cars of GT World Challenge America have in store for us here in round number 3.
And in just a few minutes, we're going to start our qualifying efforts here for 20 minutes before we roll into our 60-minute racing event tonight. And taking a look at Circuit Paul Ricard, Ryan, this is a gorgeous facility, originally built back in the 70s, but it's changed quite a bit since then. More layouts added, and there's a billion combinations that you can run around here. Today we'll be running the 1A V2 configuration, a 15-turn, 5.8-kilometer variation. This is one of those tracks that is generally fairly flat. It's also very high speed. You mentioned the long back straightaway. A lot of slipstreaming, a lot of drafting today is going to be required if you want to win one of these races.
And track limits is going to be a topic of conversation for us. You mentioned the safety record of this circuit, and a large part of that is the massive amounts of runoff that we see outside of just about every turn around this track. And as a consequence, you don't have walls to delineate what is the track and what isn't. So that's going to make for a busy day for our race stewards. Nevertheless, it should be a lot of fun to watch the drivers negotiate this track. It's a bit challenging, too. You mentioned the fact that it is relatively flat, just 108 feet or 33 meters from the highest point of the track to the lowest. That's not much compared to a lot of the natural terrain road courses that you see around the world. So when you have so much runoff on such a flat track, it does make for a challenge for these drivers to make sure that they know where they are and to position their cars correctly. So plenty of challenge, no question about it, and it should make for a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So qualifying is just underway, and a lot of the drivers out on their outlap right now. And we want to thank a bunch of our sponsors for coming on board and sponsoring the GT Rivals Esports Invitational. Of course, Assetto Corsa Competizione, which is the game that we're using, the simulator that we're using this afternoon to bring you the third round of the season. Of course, Asus, Republic of Gamers, and Tough Gaming, as well as Fanatec for, you see the branding all around the racetrack here at Paul Ricard. We want to thank them for providing some excellent sim racing equipment. And of course, Champion Motorsports for supplying some of the drivers in the field today. Ryan, as we have a couple sim racing drivers that have no real-world racing experience that are going up against some of the best in the world. And this is certainly an incredible experience for them to race up against drivers like Corey Lewis, Guy Cosmo, and more.
Well, we know that the sim racers are very capable. Just go back to last week at Misano, where Josh Staffen picked up the win against some of the best sports car racers you'll find anywhere. So they certainly know this Assetto Corsa Competizione software very well. Increasingly, though, we're seeing our real-world drivers falling into that category as well. And if practice is any indication, the real-world drivers should be right there with a very good chance at victory, if not a sweep of the podium, because the top 6 in practice that just preceded this session were all real-world racers. So it'll be curious to see what the cast of characters from Champion Motorsports can do in this one. They certainly have a tough test ahead of them, but again, they do have that home field advantage, so to speak, knowing this Assetto Corsa Competizione software so well.
And we're going to get the Pirelli tires working around here this afternoon as we go qualifying. And again, this is a 5.8-kilometer circuit. We'll go over a track map right before the start of this 60-minute race. But the big topic of discussion, this is going to be our first night race. Now, we're going to be transitioning into the nighttime. The race will start at 9 p.m. local time in Le Castellet, France. And then it'll end at 11 p.m. time with a 2 times sun movement modifier. So it's going to transition fairly quickly. The track temperature is going to drop. The grip levels are going to rise. And the track should get faster throughout the night. But so will the challenges. It's difficult enough to drive around here in the daytime. At night, though, your sight lines go away, and all of a sudden, these bright stripes kind of fade into the darkness. It's going to be extremely challenging to spot your apexes, even with your headlights on full blast here.
No question about it. You've got to hope that these drivers spent some time practicing in nighttime conditions, because you're right, you have to reprogram your brain almost trying to find those reference points. The track has a completely different look and feel when you get to the darkness, but for those that can master it, you're spot on. The temperatures come down, the track grip level goes up. Also, the later we get into the stint, you see the fuel level wearing down, so the cars are lighter, considerably so, and with the cooler temperatures, tire wear should be less of an issue than we've seen at previous rounds. So there is a high likelihood of some really fast times towards the end of this race, right when it matters the most.
A couple new drivers are joining us this week that have not yet participated in the GT Rivals Championship, and one of them is Corey Lewis for Paul Miller Racing. This will be his first round, and he said before this event this morning that he wasn't really sure how he was going to run, but in practice he was in the top 5 on the leaderboard. Right now hasn't yet laid down a time. I'm really excited to see how Corey Lewis will do. We've seen him in the sim racing world quite a bit since the world's in this current state, so I'm really curious to see how Corey Lewis is going to qualify, because if he starts out front, he's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah, he might be one to keep an eye on. No surprise to see him racing in a Lamborghini here with us. And we've had some folks asking over the last couple of weeks, where are the Lamborghinis? Well, they showed up here this week, a couple of them in the top 5 or top 6 in practice. And Corey's really built a nice resume for himself racing in Lamborghinis. Not a factory driver, but tons of experience, especially in single-bank Lamborghini Super Trofeo competition, where he's a 3-time champion, and in the Pro-Am as well as Pro categories, and he's done a lot of racing in the GT3 version of this Lamborghini Huracan as well. So if he can wrap his head around the sim version of the race car, expect to see him towards the front. He's certainly fast, has a ton of experience in the real world, and it seems to be translating quite well.
Another new name this week, Nelson Mason in the number 10 Lamborghini. This is another driver that we haven't seen yet, and you just mentioned how everyone was wondering where the Lamborghinis are. Well, we have a whole bunch of them in the field already. You can see on the timing and scoring, 1, 2, 3, at least in the top 23 right now. I think there's a couple more down at the bottom of the order that have not yet put in laps. So Mason, another driver currently leading the Lamborghinis, about 3/10 off Kenton Cook's best time of a 1:54.462.
Yeah, it's awesome to have Nelson in the field here. He's a driver with some international pedigree, did a lot of single-seater racing over in Europe. He's from Niagara Falls, Canada, and doesn't have a ton of sports car racing experience, a handful of single-make Porsche starts, done some low-level prototype racing as well, but it sounds like he's got his eyes set on making a move to GT racing in North America, which is really exciting. Like I said, he spent quite a bit of time racing in Europe. Maybe the highlight came back in 2013 when he finished 3rd in the European Formula Open Championship. The champion that year, by the way, was Ed Jones, who's had a really nice single-seater career, including Rookie of the Year at the Indy 500 a couple of years back. So it was a decent field he was racing against there, primarily in Spain. Tons of experience racing on European circuits, including here at Paul Ricard. In fact, going back to that 2013 season, one of his 3 wins came on this circuit. So he knows this one from real life, which puts him probably in the minority amongst our real-world racers here this weekend. So many of them have plied their trade in North America for most of their careers. So not a ton of them have experience on some of these tracks that are featured in Assetto Corsa Competizione. Not so for Nelson Mason, who clearly's got his hands full. He's pushing that thing to the ragged edge.
Absolutely. A couple drivers that we've seen before have switched cars for this event. How about Alec Udell was in an Audi car, the LMS GT3 last week, the R8, has switched to the Aston this week in his number 25. So changing over cars this week and maybe kind of catering to the track a little bit. Longer straightaways, maybe kind of wants a bit more straight line speed, but I think we're really going to find out today which car has the most straight line power, because that long straightaway, as you mentioned before, Ryan, is really going to separate at least the horsepower differences in these cars and the weight of these different machines. But we also have some technical sections in the first and last sector as well that's going to let some of the other cars kind of come out to play as well.
Right, which makes setup such a key component of this racing. And while some e-racing series have gone the fixed setup route, the GT Rivals series has not. So that is open for development for these drivers and teams, and increasingly we're seeing manufacturer involvement in that. I know that it was talked about on the SRO Europe e-racing broadcast earlier today that Bentley has used their real-world engineers to help develop some setups for their sim racers racing in that that series. But back to this race here, I bring up setup because you talk about maybe which car has an inherent straight line advantage, and that's certainly part of it, but also just the individual drivers tailoring the setup to their needs. You have to find that balance. Low drag down the straight means less downforce, less grip in the corners, and so finding the perfect balance, that's going to be really difficult here around Paul Ricard, and I think we'll see an advantage to anyone who's spent some time practicing this week and really working on that setup, because this track in particular really is a compromise. No surprise to see this guy, Brian Heitkotter, at the top of the time charts. He's a race winner in this series already, has a top 5 going back to last week at Misano. Probably could have had a race win there if it weren't for some contact with the wall late in that race as he was putting pressure on the leader, Josh Staffen. So Brian Heitkotter right now with a 0.6 of a second advantage over Kenton Cook, another guy who has featured prominently in our races so far.
Yeah, and actually, and interestingly for Kenton Cook, he's been running inside the top 5 in every round this season, including the test race we did at this very racetrack a few weeks ago. But Kenton has had some trouble this season with getting penalties, whether it was for avoidable contact or track limits. So he's definitely found himself with a few more drive-throughs than he would like, and now he's got to figure out how to avoid that kind of situation this afternoon if he wants to be competing for the win, because I don't think you can get a penalty and win one of these races with the level of competition that we've seen so far in GT Rivals.
That's right. It's taken flawless drives to get wins. We've seen some drivers recover to get good finishes, but I think any chance of a podium and certainly a race win goes out of the window if you have any kind of penalty or damage or even a spin would almost be enough to knock you out of contention. I did have a chance to speak with Kenton earlier, I guess in the last week or so, and subsequent to the race at Misano, where ultimately he did get a disqualification. He said that the way that his screen setup was, he didn't get the notification of a drive-through penalty on the center screen. It happened to be on one of his screens over to the side, and so he didn't see that pop up and didn't come in for his drive-through penalty like he needed to. And so even a chance for a decent finish went away when he was ultimately disqualified for not serving that penalty. I know he's made some changes subsequent to that to avoid that happening in the future, and I think he's ready to go. He's ready to put a clean race in and really be able to challenge for a win. We know he's got the pace to do just that.
There's Kenny Murillo in the number 35 car, another driver that we're familiar with from SRO America and GT World Challenge, in his number 35 Mercedes, and he currently sits 4th in qualifying after running his best lap last time through, a 154.8, puts him just shy of a second off of Heitkotter's best time, but Heitkotter is about a half a second up on Kevin Boehm, who just went his quickest lap with a 154.348 in his number 90 Crown Strike Mercedes, and boy, Ryan, does that livery look cool out there.
It really pops, that CrowdStrike livery, both here in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but also in the real world where you see CrowdStrike well represented with the DXDT team. Certainly one of the iconic liveries in the series here the last couple of years. And Kevin Boehm has been something of a revelation in this championship. He races a touring car ordinarily, does have a rich pedigree at the club racing level where he's a 5-time SCCA runoffs champion and has done a lot of touring car racing, but a big step up to GT3, even if it is a virtual GT3 Mercedes AMG here. And he was the best finisher of our real-world racers going back to our race last week, finished 2nd, and really did a nice job keeping that car in the top 5 for the whole race and was able to benefit from some attrition to notch a 2nd place finish in that race. So clearly able to back that up with some nice pace so far, just over halfway through qualifying. Needs to find a half a second to chase down Heitkotter, but nevertheless, a really remarkable couple of races here in the sim racing world from Kevin Boehm. And I think the CrowdStrike folks are going to like this picture. 2 CrowdStrike Mercedes neck and neck right there.
And the other one was the number 58 car. That they just see the 90 coming to a stop. The 58 this afternoon going to be looking down the order to try to find him in the scoring.
I suspect that's CJ Moses driving that car, who races out of the DXDT stable in TC America this year, has done some GT4 racing as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but CJ, another one with a lot of club racing experience, relatively new to the pro racing ranks, and has really been excited to be a part of the SRO America family.
So if you're watching on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or Twitch, wherever you're watching, make sure that you check out the giveaways. Of course, brought to you by Asus, Tough, and Skip Barber, and Assetto Corsa Competizione. Make sure you check the chat and enter to win. That link is in the chat below, so make sure you check that out before we get rolling here. 6.5 minutes left in qualifying. And let's check in on a couple other drivers. Corey Lewis sits in 10th after we mentioned him a little bit earlier. Tom O'Gorman got some new livery on board that car this week with the Valvoline colors, running his Honda NSX GT3. Of course, he's got another Honda teammate, Shelby Blackstock, right behind him in the number 81. And Shelby and Tomo both kind of ran in the top 15 last week, but neither of them were able to crack the top 5 towards the end. So we'll see how they do on the longer and faster Paul Ricard this week.
It's been interesting to see the NSX gang. I know they've been working a lot together. I talked to Shelby about this a couple weeks ago, and he was saying they've really worked hard as a group to try and get setups that work for everyone, or at least go in the same direction so that they can play off of one another. It's been a reasonably solid return on that time investment so far. Here's Carl Whitmer, who's new to that NSX group. He started this championship actually at a BMW and made the switch, I think it was last week, and we see him in the NSX once again. They haven't featured at the very top of the field, and the consensus is that maybe this card isn't used as much by the Assetto Corsa Competizione community, and there might not be quite as much information floating around about how to get the ultimate setup for the car, but clearly they're making gains, and we did see a couple of them running in the top 10 late in the race last week at Misano.
The lead Audi GT3 right now is Keith Briscoe in the number 49 for Champion Motorsports, and he rolls around the last couple sectors of this course in 9th place. And taking a look at the top of the order, they'll look down and look at the diversity of manufacturers. We have a Nissan GTR at the top, then a Mercedes AMG, then one of the Astons with Kenton Cook, another Mercedes, Lamborghini, Porsche, another Aston, Honda, Audi, Lamborghini. It goes back and forth. There's a Ferrari in 13th. I mean, I'm just blown away. And of course, GT3 racing is so diverse with all the different manufacturers we have, but it's great to see that level of diversity represented in Assetto Corsa Competizione and in GT Rivals. And we talked pre-race about the BOP. It is almost perfect here. Everyone on a fairly equal footing, but again, the drivers trying to find every bit that they can on the racetrack and in the setups when they set up these cars for the weekend.
Yeah, I think we talk about it every weekend for good reason. GT3 racing is the most diverse racing you're going to find at the professional level anywhere in the world. So many different types of cars, looks and sounds, and the philosophy between how these cars make speed. I mean, there's no comparison, right, between a Ferrari and a Bentley, and yet you have them racing head-to-head every weekend all around the world when we have real racing going on, and certainly here in the sim world as well. It really does speak to the whole concept that the SRO has behind GT3 racing, which is basically manufacturers, you build cars, that's what you do, we'll make rules that make them compete on an even playing field, and it's been universally lauded because they've been so successful at doing just that, and our running order here at Paul Ricard here in qualifying speaks to that as well.
And I think one of the coolest things about sports car racing, especially with this particular kind of sports car racing, is you go to any GT World Challenge event, whether it's in America or France or any other country, and the level of access that you get to these expensive racing machines is unlike no other series in the world. I mean, you can walk right up, you can talk to the drivers, shake their hands, and I think that's something really unique about this series versus other series. So if you enjoy racing, again, I'm located in the upstate New York area, going to Watkins Glen or going to Circuit of the Americas and getting up close and personal with these racing machines, it's unlike nothing else. And when the world returns to normal here, hopefully soon, I really recommend that everyone go out there and get a ticket and go to one of these events because, man, it is just the coolest experience.
And you're right, the drivers by and large are super open to fan engagement because ultimately they're fans themselves, so they get it. And to your point also about the access, before the GT3 race on Sunday, it's a free fan grid walk. You can walk right next to the cars that are about to race in the headline race of the weekend and stand there with the crews, talk to the drivers, be within inches of these amazing GT3 machines. It really is a cool atmosphere down on the grid before the races, and something I don't take for granted. Even though I work down there as the pit reporter, I still have a huge smile on my face every time we're about to roll off on the green flag because of just the atmosphere we have down on the grid in our SRO America weekends.
Race cars make you feel like a kid again, that's for sure. But
for sure.
2 minutes left in qualifying. Top of the board is still held by Brian Heitkotter with his 153.853. Kevin Bohm is about 4/10 back from that with a 154.243. Then it's Kenton Cook, Murillo, Mason, the rest of your top 5. Rieger just jumped up to 6th last time through with a 54.8. Keith Briscoe back in 7th. Ernest De La Cruz, Eric Anderson, and Carl Whitmer rounding out your top 10.
And we saw a couple changes there just as you wrapped up, and that's not a surprise. That's the nature of this stuff as well. Just 90 seconds left. Everyone knows what they need to do to try and make that charge. We've got Rieger in 7th, Mason 6th, Murillo 5th. So I think that means Dickerson is the one that just jumped up and did so to 4th. But man, what a lap that was from Heitkotter. The 153.853, nearly 4/10 of a second clear of Bohm, and only, what is it, 7-8 cars, I guess, within a second. That's all right, but they're all in the back half of that second trying to chase down this guy, the sim racing champion, real world race winner as well, Brian Heitkotter.
And to some, it's really no surprise given his performance the last couple weeks. Obviously, you mentioned that he had some contact at Misano last week, looking to have a little bit better of an experience this week and stay on course a bit more. But again, I'm so concerned about how this race is going to look from a driver standpoint. It gets dark out here. We're in the middle of the French countryside, and as soon as the light goes out up in the big sky, it's going to get really dark, and you're going to have big headlights on the front of your car, but it's not going to. You can feel like you're driving with candles out front. There's not a whole lot to see, and of course, with this track lacking a lot of natural turn-in points, again, you really just have a couple cones and the red and white curbing to kind of point you where the corners are. It's going to be an incredible challenge. Again, it's going to start at about 9 p.m. local time and head into about 11. That's where we're going to kind of wrap things up. So it's going to transition into darkness, and I'm really curious to see how drivers adapt to that as time goes on. But qualifying is going to be complete, checkered flag waving, and drivers on flying laps can complete what they started.
So we'll have to keep our eyes peeled there on the timing screen. This is a look at Kenny Murillo. I like to call him the world's fastest data engineer because that's his main job for his family-run Murillo Racing team. But whenever he hops behind the wheel, he's been awfully fast. Has a great pedigree racing at the professional level. Just a young guy, but certainly it runs in the family. 5th right now in his debut here in GT Rivals. Curious to see what he can do. He still looks like he's going to pull off there. Here's Tom O'Gorman, 15th right now. You know that's not going to sit well with him. Let's see. Can he get a nice toe here and maybe turn in one last flying lap?
And we know he's not going to be satisfied with P15. He'll try to jump up. Guy Cosmo, he started off a little bit rough last week, had some lap 1 contact, currently sits 16th on the board. And here's the number 79 car, another one of these Lamborghinis out there, 21st place right now for the number 79. Ryan, as he heads out, track limits, we're going to talk about that pre-race, but got to keep it within those white lines for the entirety of the event.
Yeah, the Norwegian Mads Siljehaug here on the flyer. He's a GT4 driver in probably GT4 America, a Ryder Engineering factory driver, and maybe that's not a name that's familiar to most, but they are the ones behind the KTM Crossbow GT4 car, and he's been racing for them for a long time. Does have some Lamborghini Gallardo experience going back quite a few years. I say quite a few years, he's pretty young, but certainly a talented guy, really excited to be racing in the States this year, and let's see what he can do here. 21st as it stands. Does he have a chance to improve?
Yes, beat a 155.9. He beat a 155.9, runs a 155.941 as qualifying completes, and in just a moment we'll bring you a recap of the qualifying order so we can kind of go over where everyone will be starting this event. So in just a moment. Ryan, but let's take a moment just to talk about this race in general. How are we thinking that this is going to start? Because we saw only a couple cars have accidents at the start of Misano, but it was later in the race with some lap traffic that's where Kenton Cook got his penalty. Let's talk about lap traffic a little bit because that was an issue when we did our test race here at Paul Ricard a few weeks ago. Do you think drivers learn anything in the past couple weeks, or do you think we're still going to have issues when we head through there for the first time?
Yeah, I think you learn something, but a lot of that flies out of your head when you're behind the wheel of a race car, right? You're in the heat of the moment, and that's really when lap traffic becomes tough, is when you are in a position where you're being lapped, but you're in a fight of your own, and you don't want to lose any advantage you might have in your own battle for position, but on the other hand, you don't want to impede the race leaders as they're coming through, and adding to the challenge here at Paul Ricard is the fact that, as you mentioned, we're going to be running into the night, and if lap traffic isn't hard enough when you can see the cars coming, you're going to have to be judging this by headlights and the relative screen, basically. It's going to be very, very challenging, I suspect, and I would not be surprised to see some incidents as we get deeper into this race because we're encountering lap traffic without a whole lot of light to speak of around this circuit.
So let's have a look at our qualifying order. It was Brian Heitkotter with a 1:53.85, the only driver to break that 1:54 time, and his Nissan GTR Nismo GT3. Then it was Kevin Boehm in second, Kenton Cook in third, Dakota Dickerson and of course, Kenny Murillo rounding out the top 5 in that number 35 car, that being the Mercedes-AMG GT3, Ryan.
Yeah, really impressive stuff from Murillo. That late flyer from Dickerson makes a big difference. I was a little surprised he didn't feature more heavily last week. He had a pretty good opening race, as I recall, at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, but nice to see him flying the flag for the prancing horse, and indeed, he did finish 4th at Laguna, just 17th last week at Masato. A little surprising there. Nelson Mason, I'm really impressed by that run to 6th in his debut. Nico Rieger and the other Ferrari. Looks like Ferrari well represented here in the top 10 with a 7th place run there in qualifying. We got Briscoe as the first of our Champion Motorsports sim racers, along with compatriot De La Cruz there in 9th, and then Shelby Blackstock, a nice run in 10th. I know he's been working awfully hard at this, and that's a qualifying effort I think he can be pretty happy with.
Absolutely, and looking towards the back of the field to try to see if there's anybody that we know is going to jump up towards the front. Well, Kevin Anderson in the number 44 car, he's going to start all the way back in 22nd spot. We know he's going to drive forward very, very quickly. Carl Whitmer starts 12th. Keep an eye on Corey Lewis as well. Ryan was incredibly fast in practice. 14th in qualifying isn't where we expected him to be, but he is going to go forward.
Well, keep in mind, qualifying is tough. There's a lot of pressure. You don't have a ton of time to work with, and traffic can play a factor there too. This is not single car qualifying, as you folks just saw. So maybe you're on a flyer and you catch somebody in a bad spot and you have to back out of it, and we might have some unrepresentative lap times a little bit further back. And I think some of the names you mentioned there are ones to keep an eye on. Tom O'Gorman as well. I think he'll be awfully quick when we get into the race. Guy Cosmo in 16th has not had a great start to this GT Rivals campaign. I know he's awfully motivated to do something about that, but he's going to have to do so from the middle of the pack, and we've seen that be a dangerous place at the start of these races.
Well, we got the starting lineup pretty much set for you here. In just a couple minutes, we're going to turn them loose for a 60-minute race heading into the darkness in the French countryside here at Circuit Paul Ricard. When we come back from a short break, we're going to bring you the track guide here at Paul Ricard, again running the 1A V2 layout at this circuit. It's a 15-turn, 5.8-kilometer circuit with the long straightaway with nothing to break it up. It is just a straight shot from the exit of turn number 7 all the way to turn 10, Ryan, and that is where we're going to see a lot of drafting and a lot of passing.
Well, that's certainly the idea behind it. The Mistral Straight, famous ever since it broke onto the scene in 1970 when the track opened. And pretty early on, they were setting records there during the French Grand Prix for the fastest trap speeds ever seen for Formula One cars, and this is back in the 70s and 80s, and we're talking 210 miles per hour down that straightaway. We won't be going quite that fast in the GT cars, but like you said, it does give you a chance to get in the slipstream and make a move. That turn 10 there at the end should be a great opportunity to make some passes, and we did see that play out back during the test race a couple of weeks back.
The race is about to begin. We'll be back with you in just one moment. Stick with us for the start. Circuit Paul Ricard is the site of our third round of the 2020 GT World Challenge America GT Rivals Esports Championship. And this quiet French countryside is about to become a cacophony of internal combustion sounds as nearly a dozen manufacturers take to the track with drivers like Corey Lewis for Lamborghini, Kyle Marcelli for Acura, and Brian Heitkotter for Nissan. Today's event will be a 60-minute sprint into pitch black darkness around this 5.79-kilometer circuit in Le Castellet, France. Welcome to GT World Challenge America. My name is Kyle Heyer from SimTV here with Ryan Marine, and it's time to go racing in France. Welcome back, everybody, for the start of this 60-minute event. Ryan, we're just about to start our pace lap here in just a moment, I think now is a good time to kind of go over the layout that we're running here today in France. Of course, we're at Circuit Paul Ricard, and this is the 5.8-kilometer version of the facility. This is the 1AV2 layout of Paul Ricard, and it is certainly a challenge in that big, long back straightaway. But Ryan, it starts with blue. That's sector number 1. And it's a left-right chicane in turns 1 and 2. Where we head up to kind of a little bit of a stadium section, turns 3 through 7 on the first sector, converting into the second sector, which is that red line on the upper half of your screen.
Yeah, definitely a technical opening section to this track with a lot of different types of corners that challenge the drivers right away. Turn 1, of course, is going to be fascinating at the start because we talk a lot about that back straight being so long. The front straight, the pit lane straightaway, is pretty long as well, so that means we're going to have a lot of speed built up, especially towards the back of the queue by the time we get to turn 1, and then everyone's slamming on the brakes to make that left-hand turn, trying to get through that cleanly. That is mission number 1 for all of the drivers in our field.
And of course, the long back straightaway out of turn number 7 into sector number 3. And as soon as you start that third sector, that's the white. That's turn 10. That's the right-hander that is almost flat out, maybe a slight security lift. And then you head into 11, 12, and 13. Very sweeping corners that will set you up for the last part of the last sector, turns 14 and 15 to finish out the lap here at Paul Ricard. So an excellent circuit for racing GT3 machines. We'll head back live here in just a moment to bring you the start of this 60-minute event from Paul Ricard. And drivers now on their pace lap. You see the light has changed here, Ryan. The sun is beginning to set, and the drivers will head into the darkness. Headlights are on, and they must be on, otherwise you'll be getting yourself a drive-through penalty. Better turn those things on, because you're going to need them, and I don't think you can even get yourself a penalty, because by the time it gets dark enough to need those lights, it's going to be pretty much impossible to see without them.
Yeah, that might be self-penalizing, and any penalty handed down by the stewards would be an insult to injury at that point. But like you said earlier during the qualifying, for folks who might be a little bit surprised at just how quickly it's going to be getting dark, we are doing this at 2 times the normal sun setting speed. That is something we could do in the virtual world and adds to the challenge a little bit, and it's going to be fascinating. I expect we're going to see very fast laps right out of the gate because of the cooler track temperatures, cooler ambient temperatures, and that's only going to increase as we get deeper and deeper into this race. It should be fun because the fastest laps of this race are going to be right at the end, right when they're most important, and also right when visibility is going to be the lowest as well. So should be fascinating here for the next 60 minutes.
Absolutely, and let's go over some keys to the race, Ryan. Track limits are a big one today. We've seen a couple drivers get penalized for them, even at tracks like WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, where there's not a whole lot of pavement to run wide onto. Here today, got to stay within those white lines. You get a couple goes outside of those. You see the little bollards on corner exit. You cannot go beyond those more than just a few times. You'll get yourself a drive-through penalty. Also, nighttime is the right time. The grip level's going to rise, and you got to move yourself forward as those grip levels come up and the track cools down.
Yeah, like we talked about, that's going to be a storyline. It should mean, however, better tire wear for these virtual Pirelli tires, and so that means the drivers should be able to push hard right from the start of this race. And then back to the track limits, I expect our stewards are going to be awfully busy trying to adjudicate those. You see the blue paint and the red paint around the track. Those are made of different materials, and if you get far enough out, it really does start to tear away at the Pirelli tires. So with that in mind, there is some penalty in addition to just the track limits violation penalties that you can incur for exceeding those track limits, but that's just the nature of racing here at Paul Ricard, for better or worse.
We've got 1 hour up on the Rebellion timepiece up at the top of the screen. It's 9:17 local time in Le Castellet, France, and it's time to go racing as we head through the final couple corners. Brian Heitkotter on pole alongside Kevin Bohm. Driver's left is the place you want to be as we head down to turn number 1. Let's turn them loose. It's GT Rivals round number 3. from Circuit Paul Ricard, waiting for the green flag to drop as they come on through the front straightaway at this 5.8-kilometer circuit. Round number 3 in 2020, brought to you by GT World Challenge America. Green flag flies for racing at Paul Ricard.
Really interesting to see Kenton Cook get a great start there in that purple Aston Martin. He has not made great starts so far in the previous races in this series. We'll see if he can hold it, but he's jumped up to second for now as Heitkotter runs wide. That promotes Cook to the lead.
Kenton Cook goes to the top spot. Kevin Bohm going to slide back into third place. A couple cars getting together on this front straightaway, but now we head into the 3, 4, 5 area of the first sector as everyone gets down on the brakes for the first time into this sector. And it's the purple car, Kenton Cook, out front right now in his number 59 Aston Martin.
Well, so far, our previous 2 races have been led flag to flag by our pole sitter, so something is changing here, at least, with Kenton Cook jumping to the lead. We'll see what Heitkotter can do running in third, and how about Kenny Murillo? Already up to second, made a great start. I do think we saw back in turn 1 towards the back of the shot a couple of cars getting together. We'll have to check on that, but here comes Heitkotter. We know he can carve his way from the back of the field to the front already down this back straightaway, making a nice move to get past Murillo, who jumps into the slipstream, and we're 2 and 3 wide further back.
Dakota Dickerson's back there on that number 72 Ferrari, kind of leading this group, and right behind him a crossover. The 72 runs way wide in corner exit. That was one of our keys to the race, Ryan, is track limits, and that's already a violation for the 72 as the 49 car slides on through. That's Keith Briscoe. He started back in 10th spot, tries to climb his way forward on the inside right in front of them. That's the 81, I believe, of Shelby Blackstock right there behind the Porsche.
Well, one of the fun parts of this track is this section here because it just swerves back and forth, gives you a lot of opportunities for over-under moves, for prolonged side-by-side racing as the advantage ebbs and flows depending on what side of the track that you're on, and it leads to some really breathtaking stuff as we're seeing here on this opening lap.
So far, so good for Kenton Cook. He is free and clear of Heitkotter, but it's only by about a second, and things are going to get really tight once Heitkotter gets that speed back up in that Nissan GTR car. You got Kenny Murillo back in third place, then Kevin Bohm in the 90, and Nico Rieger in the 51 Ferrari up in fifth.
A nice job there by Rieger, and he's got a hungry field behind him. We see Nelson Mason there, who's making his series debut in that Lamborghini right there, the number 10. He's right in the slipstream, looking to make a move, takes a peek to the right here, and that's the direction the track's about to head, but wisely backs up. We might have had some contact there, a late lunge by the Porsche.
That was Ernesto Cruz in the Satellite Racing Porsche, and he just dove in there a little bit too deep into turn 3, and that could be a penalty, but that was already self-penalizing enough, so maybe we won't see a penalty for the number 296. On through goes Alec Udell and more. And right in front of them, there's a couple of cars battling to Steve Strymer and Tom O'Gorman, the number 37 Honda NSX.
Tom right now in 17th. You could see him right there. Might actually be up to 16th now with Strymer and that Mercedes right behind. So not the start that Tomo was looking for sure. I think he had his eyes on trying to move up a little bit, but nevertheless settling into a rhythm here early as Kenny Murillo comes under pressure and slips wide. That opens the door for Bohm to come through. Bohm did not get a very good start, but he started his recovery drive already, back up into podium contention in third.
So Murillo drops back to the 4th spot. Shelby Blackstock has clawed his way forward very quickly. I believe he started just outside the top 10. Here he sits in 6th right now in the other Honda NSX, and he's right behind Nico Rieger, and behind them, Dakota Dickerson and Nelson Mason continue their battle in the 72 Ferrari and number 10 Lamborghini.
Man, this has been great here at the start. Mason taking a peek to the outside now and trying to draw up alongside, unable to do it here in this section, and you made a good point there about Blackstock. Started 10th, up 4 positions to 6th, really having a nice run here early. A spin at the back, I think that was the Bentley. That might have been Guy Cosmo going around, and a bunch of other drivers look like they got caught out of position there as the track backed up with that big old Bentley sitting sideways.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to go back and take a look at that here maybe and see if we could find out what happened, and I think we're going to have to go back a little bit farther than that, but for Cosmo, that's not what you want to get yourself in a situation this early in the race. He had trouble in lap 1 last week, and it was off the track already. But let's ride on board here and see if we can find what happened. This is heading into that final sector, and right in front of them, it was Corey Lewis was in there as well. I think we're actually back live already, so Guy Cosmo's going to drop on back. Trying to get the replay for you synced up, but looks like Cosmo has dropped back down to 12th place, so That's going to push Corey Lewis back down to 15th, so trouble there for the 48 car.
That's disappointing for him. It's great to have him in the championship. I think that was Tom O'Gorman there, just spinning off to the inside in his Valvoline-sponsored NSX, which, again, we're going to alternately refer to as Honda or Acura. Technically, in Europe, they are Hondas, but our North American audience knows them as Acuras. It is the same car, just badged differently depending on where in the world you're watching from. But O'Gorman here now didn't get a great run, obviously, after that spin, so he's under attack. And wow! That Aston just clipped his nose coming across.
I was trying to see what car that was. Was it Eric Anderson's 555 and just kind of turned across the nose, and there was trouble there. Behind them, there's a 4-car battle. That's Dominic Urin in the 780, Thomas Merle in the number 39 car, and Ernest De La Cruz in the 296 Porsche, who had that incident a couple laps ago, and Carl Whitmer in the 22 Acura.
And I'm really surprised to see Carl so far down the running order. He had a great race at Laguna Seca in the season opener, driving a BMW, I might add. Made the switch last week to this NSX and didn't have quite the result that he had at the opening round, and is mired down in 23rd. And for a guy that a lot of the pros identified as one of the better sim racers of the pro racers, to see him running in this position is definitely a surprise.
Jumping back up, how about a battle for 5th spot? That's Rieger on the outside, Blackstock on the inside, and down into turn 1. Blackstock goes on through, so the 81 up on the move early. You mentioned his starting position back in 10th. Here he is up into 5th spot now, continuing his climb, and so far, Blackstock has been super impressive.
Really impressive, and I do believe he did take part in our test race here at Paul Ricard, and if that is the case, he does have a little bit of extra seat time in race conditions driving at Paul Ricard in Assetto Corsa Competizione. And so with that said, it's not a huge surprise to see him moving up, and we've seen him progressing week in and week out, just getting a bit stronger, it seems like, every week. He does have some European racing in his roots, of course, best known for what he's done in single-seaters in the States, but has made that transition to sports car racing and really seems to have found a nice niche for himself. Had a great opening weekend to the GT World Challenge America powered by AWS season at Circuit of the Americas, where he and Trent Hidman swept the weekend there in Austin, Texas, and maybe some of that momentum carrying over to the virtual world.
Right behind me, see Nelson Mason in the number 10 Lamborghini beginning to close in as well. And Mason's been really impressive. This is his first round of the GT Rivals Esports Championship. And now looking on a top 5 if he can just get by the Ferrari in front of him and the Acura beyond that. So we had a bit of an Italian battle between Ferrari and Lamborghini a little bit ago. Let's do it all over again now with Mason and Rieger.
That's awesome. It's a great rivalry in the Italian supercar market, and it's a great rivalry here on the racetrack as well. Rieger in 6th, on board with Mason in 3rd. You can see how the Constantina effect comes into play in some of these really tight corners. Everyone bunches up, and looks like we might have a couple of drive-thrus to serve.
Both these drivers serving drive-thrus, so they're going to come in right nose to tail, and they'll come on in and serve those penalties. Looks like Siljahag has one as well, down in 12th in his Lamborghini, and looks like he's going to come in as well as Patrick Byrne in the number 9 car is also going to hit pit lane. So a lot of drivers with penalties early. One who's glad he doesn't have a penalty is Kenton Cook, still your leader right now, Ryan, and he's avoided trouble so far, and let's hope he can do it, but he's got Highcutter still half a second back.
Now, this is the start he has been looking for. Hasn't had a good start in any of our previous races, including the test race here, which he had some issues in, but actually recovered to get a good finish. And right now, Kitten doing a great job keeping Brian Highcutter at bay. We know how good Brian is. His qualifying lap was absolutely superb. Just head and shoulders ahead of the rest of the field. I think it was close to 0.4 of a second. So really a great job by Kenton to keep Brian behind. Kenton told me within the last week that he really hadn't done a ton of sim racing prior to this little break that we find ourselves in from real world racing, but he's really loved the opportunity to put his name out there once again, and he's doing a really great job once again, showing such great pace in this Aston.
And you mentioned Brian Highcutter, and he's been so impressive so far. Last lap through, ran a 1:55.224, and that was, let's see, last time by, it was a little slower than Cook, actually, so he was closer last time through, but I see Highcutter gaining a lot through this first sector here, Ryan.
Well, it certainly looks that way, and we should not be surprised to see him showing supreme pace. That's what he does. He's so good, and we tell the story every week, but he got his start in pro racing based on his accolades sim racing, beating out over 50,000 North American competitors to win the GT Academy North America title over a decade ago at this point, and that led to a really great career racing all around the world with Nissan, including in the predecessor to the GT World Challenge America Championship, Pirelli World Challenge, and was a race winner there. So he's got that combination of experience in the real world and in the sim world. He's very, very fast, and amazingly, I got to see the setup that he uses, and you would think someone with a sim racing background would have some kind of rig with all the bells and whistles, and I'm here to say it makes me a little bit ashamed at how poor of a sim racer I am, because he can really get it done with some pretty basic stuff, and it shows you talent is talent, and you don't have to have that $10,000 rig, as he puts tons of pressure on Kenton Cook.
Well, to make that look easy, he drives to driver's left and just blows right on by, and that's the power of the slipstream on a straightaway this long ride. He goes through and takes the lead away from Kenton Cook into turn 10.
Well, that Nismo GTR GT3 is awfully fast in a straight line. It has that reputation. If you watch the Intercontinental GT Challenge powered by Pirelli season opener at the Liqui Moly Bathurst 12-hour this year, we saw that Godzilla, as it's known colloquially in the racing world, really show what it can do in a straight line there at Mount Panorama, where coincidentally we'll be racing later this season in GT Rivals, and really showed what it was made of there. So not a huge surprise to see it fast in a straight line here at Paul Ricard as well, and you put a wheelman like Brian behind the wheel to complement the car, and that's a package that's going to be very difficult to beat.
Well, there's a lot of action around 11th place right now. That's Kevin Anderson in the Aston Martin, and right behind him, the Acura NSX driven by Tom O'Gorman. Ernest De La Cruz recovering from that early spin in the number 296 Porsche.
Yeah, doing a great job of it. We know he's capable of it. Had a nice qualifying run and now finds himself in this battle pack right behind O'Gorman, who's taking a look at the inside of Kevin Anderson as well, who our TC America fans will know, and his Tech Sport Racing team that Kevin runs, making the jump to GT3 racing here in ACC, and he's got his hands full. A bunch of hungry drivers right behind him, led by Tom O'Gorman and Ernest De La Cruz right there, making sure that O'Gorman feels the urgency to try and get this move made.
Oh, that was really dicey heading down into turn 1. O'Gorman trying to cover to keep De La Cruz from heading to the driver's right, because it's a left and then a right. So if a driver can stay on the outside through that first left-hander, you set yourself up not only for turn 2, but turn 3 as well. So De La Cruz wasn't able to do that, as Tomo stays in P12 for now. Checking down the order slightly, Steve Strymer in the 42. He has his hands full with Thomas Merrill in the 39 Ferrari. It looks like Merrill's going to go up the inside for turn 3.
Yeah, great move by Thomas Merrill there. He's a guy that maybe isn't a household name, but was an up-and-comer for sure. If you go back a decade or so, it looks like Strymer ran wide, and that opened the door for a couple other cars, at least one to slip to the inside. I suspect that was
Mason, actually.
Mason, yeah, who's recovering from that penalty we saw him serve earlier in the race. But Merrill has done a ton of work as a driving coach and an instructor. He's raced in Trans Am, where he won several races a year ago, quite a few races in fact, but does a lot of work with the Skip Barber Driving School, and just has a great pedigree of helping drivers get into the sport, which is so important and really a story worth telling.
And to the inside goes Mika Rieger, another one of those drivers that had a penalty to serve, and so he'll go on through to 19th. Another penalty we have to mention is Alec Udell has a drive-through still outstanding. He runs inside the top 10 right now at 8th place in his Aston Martin GT3 car, and we also just saw the 17 car get assessed a penalty. That is Derek de Bauer in the Porsche 911 GT3, so he's going to have to come on through and serve a drive-through as well.
That's too bad, especially well, for Derek, who's a longtime competitor in the series. People know him probably from that Fast Life TV. You can see it as the sponsor down under his name on the bottom right of the screen. That's a TV show that he and his wife, Brooke, have put together. You can find it on Amazon, and it chronicles his racing highs and lows, and it really does a great job of telling his story. But for Alec Udell as well, to see him get that drive-through penalty, just hasn't had a ton of great results in this. We see him racing at Aston this week, which is different. He's been in the Audi previously. obviously, and taking that drive-through penalty, that's going to be pretty costly. Still a good chance at a top 10 finish if he can recover and have a nice race from here, but that's going to hurt for sure and take him out of contention for any hopes at a podium.
Well, let's jump back up to the front because Heitkotter has started to just set sail out front. As he does, Kenton Koch has dropped now to 1.8 seconds behind, and the 90 to Kevin Boehm is a long ways back, almost 10 seconds behind Kenton Koch in that Crown Strike Mercedes.
And that surprises me. I thought we might see him able to recover and come and put some pressure on Kenton as this goes. He had a great run, as we talked about last week, finishing in second, and also just the pace that he's shown in practice as well as qualifying here this weekend. I thought maybe he would have something for Kenton, and still plenty of time to get up there, but he's got some work to do. I think the battle, though, that's brewing is right behind him. Kenny Murillo, some 7 seconds back of Kevin Boehm. He's going to have his hands full soon because Shelby Blackstock is not done. He has been a hard charger in this race, and he's cut that deficit down under a second now. So Kenny's going to have company here before too much longer. In fact, there they are in the same shot.
We've talked about Blackstock quite a bit today, and he just continues to impress as he now runs for fourth. This is by far his best run of the series this year. And again, just ran a 156.6. That was a full second better than Kenny Murillo as they work by some lap traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. That lap traffic is going to be a huge part of it. I think that was Derek DeBoer there. We saw him serve that penalty, I believe, just a little while ago. And especially as we get into the darkness, we're just over 16 minutes into this race. Darkness is coming, and it's coming soon. So this will have a whole different look and feel to it here before too much longer, as Shelby doing everything he can to find the fastest way through these quarters, really pushing the envelope a little bit.
And he pushed it too far. He just got himself a stop-and-go penalty for 30 seconds for that corner cut there. That was a cut on apex, which is definitely less forgiving than if you track out a little bit too far. So the run that he was having is now going to be tarnished by a drive-through or a stop-and-go penalty, rather. So that's even more severe than just a drive-through, and that's really going to hurt his chances to run top 5 today.
Oh, that's brutal because he was putting on a show for us. Probably the drive of the race as far as I was concerned. Starting 10th, the drive up to 6th in just a couple of laps, and was putting pressure on Kenny Murillo for 4th as we're watching right here. That is a costly penalty. Not just the drive-through, but the stop and hold for 30 seconds will take him out of contention, and you got to feel for him because it's easy to do when there aren't clear delineations when you're in the cockpit of what is the track and what isn't. Yeah, you've got the bollards there that make it clear once you run over them, but it's not the easiest thing to pick out from inside the race car, and that's a real shame for Shelby.
Yeah, Corey Lewis also just picked up a drive-through penalty as well. So we're seeing penalties kind of left and right here as we get kind of into the meat of this race. We're just shy of 20 minutes in, and we've seen a handful of drivers get penalties so far more towards the tail of the field, but now some of our front runners getting dinged for most likely track limits violations. But Corey Lewis just a drive-through, so he actually, even with the penalty, should jump Shelby Blackstock here in the pits.
Well, that's true. That is the silver lining here, I suppose, for Corey. He's going to wait a lap at least to serve that penalty, and there is some thought to that. I think you have 3 laps to serve the penalty, and if you can run fast laps and build a bigger gap to those chasing you, then you don't lose as much when you take that penalty. So perhaps that's what he's thinking, but you got to be careful here because the stewards do not take kindly to any contact with another car if you have a penalty outstanding, because now you're affecting somebody else's race when really you're not going to be in that position for much longer. I suspect that maybe somebody told Kyle Marcelli that was the case because he didn't put up a huge fight there and just let Corey go, which would be the prudent move in that case. And Kyle, I think we should highlight here because he did not qualify well outside the top 15, I believe, and has made his way up to 8th, and really that's a remarkable feat to survive the start and then to put in the laps and clean running to get himself inside the top 10, and he'll inherit 7th spot once Corey takes that penalty.
Well, I don't want to say slow and steady wins you the race, but I'll say slow and steady will at least let you finish the race. And Kyle Marcelli's been doing more than just that. climbing up into the top 10 and just staying out of trouble is a good way. Right in front of them is Corey Lewis in the number 48 car as he had just gone by. But Keith Briscoe's now up in 6th. Dakota Dickerson moves into 5th in his number 72 Ferrari. And down the order a little bit, we talked earlier about Carl Whitmer and how far back he was. We were surprised by that. Well, he's got Tom O'Gorman and Acura teammate right behind him, so they're going to work on by. The 296 is all for position, led by the 44 Kevin Anderson and that number 44 Essen right in front of them.
Wow, what a battle this is. 3 cars here. Really, you can make it 4. There's a dive to the inside and some contact sends the 296 around, as well as problems for the NSX. So that breaks up what was figuring to be a great battle. Here's a look at that replay. That was an ambitious move, to be sure.
Yeah, that really was a little bit deep there for the Whitmer car, but we're going to head back up live to the front of the field because Heidkotter still leads this race, and Kenton Cook now drops about 2 seconds back. That's kind of where it's been for the last little bit, but as you look now, you see how dark the track is getting, and this is when visibility starts to become a problem for these drivers.
That's right, and it's only going to get worse. I'm not super familiar with how much added artificial lighting there is around this track, but it does look like we do have some, so it's not going to be just the headlights of these cars, but even still, it's going to have a completely different look and feel, not just from us on the outside or for the fans watching along, but especially for the guys in the cockpit, and especially as they're entering into lap traffic, and we're going to see more and more of that as the race progresses. Keep in mind, this is a long track, 5.8 miles, or kilometers rather, this layout, which is a shade over 3.5 miles, one of the longest Grand Prix circuits on the current F1 calendar. So it's going to take a while for some of that backmarker traffic to come into view for the leaders, but when it does, we've seen that be a huge storyline in our previous races, including our test race here, and I'm fascinated with the idea of our leaders potentially fighting amongst themselves, but also fighting their way back up through the back of this pack.
So Kenton Cook sits in 2nd spot, as we mentioned. Let's go back to Carl Whitmer in the number 22. I'm curious if we'll see a penalty or maybe just a warning for some avoidable contact there. But Tom O'Gorman split the difference and went in between those 2 spinning cars, move himself up inside the top 10. So a slow start for Tomo, but now he's worked his way inside the top 10. So Dominic, you're in the 780 Porsche right behind. That's the beautiful gold livery he's got on that car this week.
That is the sharp-looking race car. Always love the look of a 911, but when it's painted up well, it's hard to beat that. That's a really good-looking race car. It's going to look great, I suspect, under the lights as well. Just outside the top 10, second best of our sim racing veterans. And then here's Guy Cosmo. We did see him with that spin earlier, but he's on pace now for the best result he's had so far, even if he just stays here in 14th, which I'm sure he's not content with. But I think a couple of 23rd place finishes is all he has to show for the first 2 races of the season, and this is a great shot for a couple of reasons. One, it's just neat to see the inside of these race cars, and it's a pretty accurate modeling of what the Continental GT3 looks like inside, but also this car is unique amongst GT3 cars because it is right-hand drive like you see here, and drivers in the real world talk about the fact it does take a little while to get used to that. I'm sure that's the case in the virtual world as well, but he has a different perspective on this racetrack than just about anybody else.
That's an interesting note to make. Again, for drivers that are kind of used to this, switching sides, especially from the prototype ranks where you're kind of centered, it's not too big of a change. But for a driver that maybe comes from a different style of race car, that's a big transition to make. Because I think you'll see a lot of drivers drop wheels off the side of the track on corner entry just because they're not exactly sure where the corner of the car is, and especially on a car that's this big like the Bentley is. Right. There's a lot of width to account for.
I've had some interesting different takes on it from various drivers. Guy Cosmo told me it didn't take him long at all to adjust, and I know that Alvaro Parent, who is an absolutely world-class GT3 racer, he said it did take him some time to get used to being with the right-hand drive. The other thing that it does when we get to races with pit stops, which our GT Rivals race does not have, is it changes the in and out procedure depending on what racetrack you go to, and sometimes you're better off. Like if certain racetracks, if that pit wall is close to the right-hand door, that doesn't affect most cars, but it does affect the Bentley, and it makes the driver changes a bit more difficult. And the inverse is true when they're going the opposite direction. So very interesting as we look in on the battle for 4th here. Bohm has gotten past Murillo, and now Dickerson would like to do the same.
Yeah, Dakota Dickerson closing in this number 72 Ferrari. We've seen a lot of pace out of Dickerson this season. Maybe he hasn't gotten the finishes that he needs or deserves, but now closes right into the rear of that 35 Mercedes in his Ferrari at this time. So they're going to head through the first sector. Sun continues to set kind of in the blue hour here in Le Castellet, France, and get yourself a bottle of wine and a baguette because it's about to get fun out here. With 35 minutes to go, it's about 10 o'clock local time, and the sun has definitely dipped behind the horizon. And now it's really the witching hour for these drivers as the visibility gets worse. As you see now, look at the closing in for Dickerson. Battle for the fourth spot on the back straightaway. He goes to driver's left.
This is his chance, and he gets it done even before the braking zone. Murillo ducks back into the slipstream. We'll see if he makes an attempt, but decides better of it and sits back there right behind Dakota Dickerson. Dakota does run wide there a little bit. That gives Kenny a chance to close in, but can't make the pass stick right there. Kenny with a lot of experience in the GT4 version of the Mercedes-AMG, but this, of course, the GT3 variant here for our GT Rivals series. Dickerson right now in fourth. That would match his best result of the season. He finished fourth in the season opener at Laguna, 17th last week at Misano, and he's been really, really fast, just absolutely reeling in Murillo before he made that pass by something like 0.7 of a second, we're told, per lap, which is a remarkable gain right there. So we'll see if he can do that with Kevin Bohm as well and notch his first podium of the season so far.
Just shy of halfway at Circuit Paul Ricard for GT Rivals round number 3 of the 2020 season, brought to you by GT World Challenge America. And this has been a spectacular season so far at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca for round 1, Mazzano round 2, and of course Paul Ricard for round 3. Of course, all the great sponsors at the bottom of the screen supporting the series and making an effort to bring esports action in a very uncertain time in this world. So thank you to all of the sponsors listed below, and of course a special thanks to Assetto Corsa Competizione and the Kunos crew, who's been pushing out updates like crazy to keep up with all the chaotic times and pushing to make this sim even better. But look at this now. It is getting darker and darker by the minute. The track almost pitch black now for the drivers, and the only really thing that you can see out the nose of these cars is the glow of the car in front.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. This is a great shot right here coming down the long Mistral Straight into that fast right-hander at the end of it. Murillo already has dropped off about a second from Dakota Dickerson, who needs to work, what is he, well, we'll see that update. 16 seconds behind Bohm for the final podium spot. Murillo in 5th, and as we drop back a little bit, the battle for 8th is starting to pick up, and in fact, I think it might have just settled itself as Carl Whitmer, Kunos' brother, Carl, has slipped past Anderson. So interesting, because we saw Whitmer have that contact earlier. Evidently, no harm, no foul. He clearly has not served any kind of penalty there, and I'm a little bit surprised by it. It seemed optimistic at best, but then again, that is a tough part of the track, and he was up to the wheel well or thereabouts, so I can certainly see where the stewards are coming from.
Oh, the 780 Porsche just went by Tom O'Gorman in turn 10, but crossover and cross under goes Tomo, and through he passes back for the top 10 spot in the Valvoline-sponsored car, and the gold Porsche tucks back in line, and right behind is Ernesto La Cruz in the 296. Had some trouble today, a pair of spins earlier in the race, but recovering quite nicely, almost knocking on the door for a top 10 spot again. And this really goes to show how fast he's been today. Best time of a 56.5, which is quicker than most of the drivers in front of him, so he's certainly competitive, just needs to get that consistency down, and of course the second spin wasn't really much of his fault.
No, it really wasn't, and you kind of feel bad for him because he's had good pace, and as I recall, the first spin maybe fell into that category as well. Looks like Tom O'Gorman has picked up a drive-through penalty that needs to be served at some point, and he's right at the head of this freight train here. But De La Cruz, a 23-year-old, he's a student, but very active with the Champion Motorsports Group and doing a nice job here just outside the top 10. Probably has the pace to get a top 10 result in his debut in the GT Rivals Series.
And so O'Gorman will have to come through and serve that penalty, and so does the 296, also a drive-through penalty. So both of those cars are going to have to come down and serve. Curious, though, I wanted to kind of bring your attention to the timing and scoring pylon. The drivers in gray, again, are the esports-only drivers, and I'm seeing a lot less of them at the top of the board than maybe we would have expected after the last couple weeks that we've seen.
Well, I think there's a couple reasons potentially that could explain it. One, it is a revolving door. It's not the same group of drivers out of the CMS stable every weekend, so you're going to have a little variation there. But also, I do think all of a sudden, as the weeks progress, we were expecting the real-world drivers to get more experience with the Assetto Corsa Competizione, and the advantage inherent in having experience with this sim for the sim drivers will start to wane as the season progresses, and we may have reached that point here. So I would say that perhaps those two reasons might be collaborating, and the explanation why Briscoe, who we're riding on board with right now, is the top of the champion drivers running in sixth. A very nice run and the best Audi in the field.
And he's about to get one spot better if he can get by Kenny Murillo in this kind of pumpkin spice orange number 35. Get a bit of a slipstream on the front straight into the braking zone, takes a dive up the inside, thinks better of it, and backs out. And that's really an experienced esports move right there. You don't want to pick yourself up a penalty. We're still only halfway through this race, at 30 minutes in right now. So there's really no reason to force that move at this time.
That's right. It was definitely a patient move, maybe the move of a seasoned veteran, if you will. You think of sim racing as a young man's game, but Keith Briscoe, at 50 years old, puts lie to that notion. He's from Austin, Texas. He spent a couple years living in Australia and actually picked up a love of Aussie rules football while he was over there. And if somebody can explain the rules of that to me, I'd be impressed. That's seems like a riddle as far as I'm concerned. But also very fast behind the wheel of a race car, as you can see here, putting some pressure on Kenny Murillo, and we'll see what Kenny can do. He seems to be slipping back a bit as this race has progressed.
Well, Tom O'Gorman disqualified by race control, and I guess he might have had that drive-through for longer than we thought, because disqualified, removed from the racetrack, like we saw with Kenton Cook last week at Misano. So that's obviously not what we wanted to see for Tomo. It looked like Guy Cosmo had a drive-through penalty, but it just got cleared, so whatever that was for certainly was not supposed to be there. So Cosmo will either that or he just served it. But either way, that penalty has been cleared. He runs 17th as we continue to watch the battle for 5th.
I wonder if Guy might have served that penalty, because I think he was running a little bit higher up when we checked in with him a little bit before, but I can't confirm that for sure. Here is Murillo, though, withstanding a lot of pressure from Briscoe right behind him, and now you have the added challenge racing at night. You've got those headlights glaring in your virtual rearview mirror. Briscoe taking a peek up the inside, which becomes the outside. That's one of the fun parts of this track. You're going to see that track weaving back and forth, but a nice run out of the final corner there for Briscoe, and he's going to have the inside line coming up here in just a moment.
Murillo's holding him tight as they head down to turn one. He's got drivers left all the way against the white line. He'll back out for a moment, and they're going to run nose to tail down into the first sector, but Briscoe backed out of that and didn't feel comfortable staying that close to the edge of the racetrack, and that's fair move by Kenny Murillo. That's a great defensive strategy. Give the guy just as much space as he needs and no more, because he will force you back over to driver's right and be able to take that position. So Kenny stayed strong, kept his line, and I don't think Briscoe wanted to go in there that close to his door.
Well, Kenny cut his teeth racing Mazda Miatas and MX-5 Cup cars, and so I'm sure he's used to a little bit of this. You always, with a car that has such a low horsepower number, you're going to have a lot of drafting, you're going to have a lot of pack racing. So he's used to having some pressure coming from behind and knowing how to hold it off. He's a really experienced driver for a guy as young as he is, and really smart as well. I mentioned he's the data acquisition guy for his family-run Murillo Motorsports team. His dad's been a part of the sports car racing landscape in GT racing and touring car racing for a long time. And Kenny really stepped in and impressed in Pirelli GT4 America last year, despite not having previous GT4 experience. Didn't run a full season. In fact, only 4 Sprint X West Pro-Am starts, but won 3 of those 4 races, along with Christian Shimshak, his co-driver. So he's definitely fast, and we'd love to see him behind the wheel when we can get him there, but I know the team likes him in his data acquisition role because he's awfully good at that too.
Absolutely. So about 26 minutes and 50 seconds left. Again, make sure you enter to win Asus Tough Gaming Peripherals bundle and, of course, ACC. So make sure you check the link in the chat to make sure you can participate in that free enter. And we continue to watch that battle for 5th here as the light in the sky has gone off. And here we go, side by side for 5th place. And Briscoe again taking a look on the front straightaway, but seems to really be struggling to make this move stick.
He's going to take a dive to the inside there. Can't get it done. Kenny really clever with the positioning of his race car right down the middle, which makes it a difficult proposition to decide, do you want to go left or right? Briscoe, I suspect, is getting fed up with this, and the aggression level might start to come up a little bit. Clearly the faster of the two cars, and he's got that Aston right in his rearview mirror. That is not for position, and speaking of difficult situations to find yourself in, we were talking earlier about being a lap car fighting for position. How about being a lap car being faster than the leaders that you're racing around, as Eric Anderson clearly is, but not wanting to interfere with their battle? That's a really tough spot to find yourself in. Anderson racing out of the Champion Motorsports stable, one of our sim racing veterans in the field.
That was one of the drivers that kind of got tangled with Tom O'Gorman on the back straightaway earlier in the race. I'm wondering maybe if that penalty for Tomo was related to that incident there, as you see the fourth place battle again heating up, or the fifth place battle rather, as Briscoe goes on through. Murillo's going to run way wide on exit, come back on course, but the 49 Audi is through.
Finally got it done, and maybe not where we expected it to happen. The opportunities haven't really been there at that part of the track in previous laps. It seems like that final corner, getting a big jump out of there, has been the strength of Briscoe and that Audi platform, but that time able to get the run down the back straightaway, get that move made to the inside, and Murillo at that point had no choice but to relinquish the spot. He'll have to settle back in and try and get it back into a rhythm a little bit. Still has a lot of buffer between himself and the car chasing. I think that's Kyle Marcelli right now back in 7th, some 12 seconds adrift.
So we just got an update thanks to Finian from behind the scenes, another Sim TV crew member tuning us in, that it was Tom O'Gorman's penalty was related to that contact with Eric Anderson. So we'll move on back. How about a battle for 11th? And it's James Pesek and let Nelson Mason right on through in the number 10 Lamborghini. So trade those spots for 10th.
Well, Mason's on a recovery drive. Remember, he had that drive-through penalty earlier, making his debut here in GT Rivals. In fact, his first SRO America start of any kind, and it comes in the virtual world. We understand he's got his eyes set on racing in GT World Challenge America or one of the SRO America Championships at the very least. A very experienced single-seater driver from Canada, but has done most of his racing over in Europe. And an interesting story, he's actually a motorsports engineering he has a degree, I should say, in motorsports engineering from a university in England, and while there, he competed in an intra-university karting championship that exists in England. Well, actually, all of Great Britain, because some Welsh and Scottish teams are involved as well. So a really cool deal there, but now making that transition from single-seaters to sports cars after many years spent over in Europe racing in various championships.
You mentioned Kenny Murillo, and I was just trying to see right behind him there is still Eric Anderson, but you mentioned Kyle Marcelli, not too far behind. Let's jump down through the field a little bit, check out some drivers we haven't talked about today. Here's the number 22 TRG Aston Martin, that's Jason Alexandritis in the number 21 car, and I probably butchered that name, Ryan, but we're all learning every week.
We are. He's making a debut. Actually, I take that back. He did race last week at Misano, finished 22nd in an Aston Martin, has real-world Aston Martin racing experience. Interestingly, although he has not competed on a full-time basis in SRO championships, he did make an Intercontinental GT Challenge powered by Pirelli start back at the California 8 Hours last year. Did so in a TRG Porsche Cayman, as a matter of fact, teaming with Spencer Pompelli and Chris Bellomo, and they finished on the podium in their GT4 class, which is pretty cool. But interesting, he didn't choose to race at Laguna Seca, where of course that race was held, and has jumped in for some of these races here on European circuits. He's a businessman, spent a lot of years in Silicon Valley before opening up a branch of the Rebounders indoor trampoline park out near his home in Northern California, and that's been his business for the last several years. A real avid race car driver, and doing a nice job right now, running cleanly back in 22nd.
Toby Grohovic in the number 26 car, also out here. Had some trouble last week in Misano, and this race hasn't really gone as smoothly as he would have liked. Currently runs 24th right now. John Miller back here in the 38 car. That's another BMW M6 out on track. And we haven't really seen a lot of the BMWs up at the front today, Ryan.
That's true, and they featured quite prominently if you go back to the first race of the season, and again, I guess that has something to do with Carl Whitmer, who was driving a BMW at that point. Carl and John both drive for the same ST Racing team in SRO America competition in the Pirelli GT4 America category. Last year, John Miller drove with Harry Gottsacker, and they actually won their class championship for the season, which he told me, despite having been racing for quite a few years at this point, and at a high level, that was his first championship in anything, and I was stunned to find that out. But definitely a really good talent, perhaps a bit unknown, and that's a bit of a shame because he's very good behind the wheel and has found a nice home for himself with the ST Racing team.
In the darkness, you see the oval taillights of Patrick Byrne in the number 9. That's that K-Pax Racing, or one of the other K-Pax Racing Bentley Continental GT3s, and he runs 17th right now. A nice day for him so far. But this is really interesting, Ryan, as we look on board, how pitch black it has gotten out here. We thought visibility was bad before. Now it's almost impossible to see more than a couple hundred feet in front of you.
Yeah, still 20 more minutes to go. I can't imagine it gets too much darker than this, but I might be proven wrong here before too much longer. We'll see Patrick Byrne, who has made a couple of starts in SRO America in the past, done a lot of racing all around the world, a champion in prototype racing in Asia, actually, a couple of years back, and earned an invitation to Le Mans, which unfortunately he wasn't able to take up. But he and Guy Cosmo have been working together for a very long time. They are working together again this year, not just in GT Rivals, but driving, as you said, for K-Pax Racing, driving this Bentley Continental GT3 in the GT World Challenge America, powered by AWS this season. Didn't get off to a great start, unfortunately, to the season back at Circuit of the Americas, but they've got high hopes, and this team has been very strong the last couple of seasons, consistently fighting for championships, both the all three manufacturers, drivers, and teams championships, and it's one of the stalwart teams of North American sports car racing.
Right behind him in 18th spot stayed Hasser in the 92 Porsche. Haven't talked about him yet today, but a couple seconds behind the 9, a couple seconds in front of Guy Cosmo, who you see in the other K-Pax Racing car, a couple seconds back. But Hasser is climbed forward a little bit in this yellow and black Porsche and is having a pretty solid day inside the top 20.
Doing a nice job, 18th at the moment from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. This is his debut here in the GT Rivals Championship. Again, one of our sim racers from Champion Motorsports, and a big thanks to them for all that they've done helping to host this as we all move off into the brave new world of esports. The SRO folks are so experienced sanctioning actual real-world racing, but need a little help as we make the transition into GT racing online. And the Champion Motorsports folks have been very giving and helping to do that. As we peek in here, this is the battle for 9th. It is tight. Last time they went by a timing strip, the difference between 9th and 10th was less than a tenth of a second. In fact, 39 thousandths of a second between Anderson and Guerin.
And you see this battle for 9th place. And now, as the sun goes down, the intensity always rises. See them pass under the gantry and start-finish line. 18 minutes to go. We're getting down to crunch time here. This is pretty much the last stint of the race, this last 20-minute section. We're down to the final third, and now Guerin's not going to wait around. He's not going to be patient. This is when you get up on that wheel, and you're driving without any care or attention to anything beyond what your headlights can see. You're focusing on what's directly in front of you, but you don't want to get you don't want to kind of get target fixation following a car this closely into some of the heavier braking zones.
That's true. You run the risk of the sympathy spin, right? If the guy in front of you spins off and you're too focused on that car, you end up doing effectively the same thing sometimes. And so that's kind of where you stand, and it's even more difficult when you can't see much beyond that car that's right in front of you. Let's see what he can do here. This appears to be a pretty good run that he's got, and might be able to get this done as he takes that look to the outside. I suspect he's got a run to get him clear even before we get to the corner up here in just a moment. We'll see.
They're going to run side by side into turn number 10, and he's still door to door as they head into the braking zone. And it's not much of a braking zone. You're not slowing down a whole lot, but still side by side. Now the 44 re-clears him there. We did hear that the 51, and Carl Whitmer also has a drive-through penalty. So does the 13th place car, Thomas Morrill, in the 39. So a couple drive-throughs getting handed out with almost 15 minutes to go. So that's a huge blow to especially Carl Whitmer, who's running inside the top 10 right now.
Yeah, that really does hurt for Carl, who's always been on the pace every time we've watched him racing here in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but that one's going to drop him out of contention for any kind of representative finish relative to his pace, so that really does hurt there. But this battle continues between Anderson and Guerin, and I think the last time it was something like 39 thousandths of a second. This time it was 16 thousandths of a second. It's a little bit further apart here as they head into the first corner, but going back down that back straightaway, we've talked before about which car might be the fastest in a straight line, and we saw in our trial race here at Paul Ricard, Aston Martin, both the V8 and V10 versions of those cars have been very, very fast in a straight line, and that showed once again here just a few moments ago.
And we're hearing that the penalty for Whitmer was for the contact with the 296 of Ernesto La Cruz back in turn 12 about 20 minutes ago. So that's what that penalty was for. 15 minutes to go. Still watching the battle for ninth between Anderson and Guerin in the Porsche. So it's Aston versus Porsche right now. The Germans versus the British, or the British, as they head down the back straightaway once again. The slipstream for the 780. Here we go. Another run.
Well, we saw the run stall out the last time. It looked like it was a little bit stronger here for the Porsche, but he's going to be on the outside coming up into this next corner. And this is what I was talking about. That Aston really gets down the straightaway well. Despite that great run from the Porsche, he can't clear the Aston. In fact, still side by side, and it's rinse and repeat from the last lap where Guerin really didn't have a choice, just had to settle right back in, and he's going to have to make that move someplace else. The Aston too strong coming down the back straightaway.
I tell you, it's a great fight, though, as we continue to watch this. This is one of the closest battles on the racetrack, so we'll stay here for now. No changes up front. Heidkotter's been driving away 9.6 seconds in front of second-place driver Kenton Cook in the 59 Aston, and then it's Kevin Bohm in third in the Mercedes. Dakota Dickerson up to fourth in the Ferrari 488 GT3, and of course Keith Briscoe in the 49 rolls in fifth right now, so you continue to watch this fight. Oh, big dive into 15, and Anderson has to give him space, but not enough for Guerin to complete that pass.
Yeah, not quite. That was awfully close there, though, as he continues to work. You thought that might have been the chance right there, but it doesn't go that way. How about this move, though? Late move across the track and inside into the braking zone.
And looks like he is almost through. The 44 still has the inside lane. A bit of a slip and a bobble for the 780, and around he spins at the exit of turn 2. And just like that, a battle for a top 10 position goes away. He's going to drop it on another spot here as Nelson Mason, I believe, has just gone on through as well. So for the 780, what was a pass for position has quickly slipped away here. Let's try to see if we can get a replay of that. We'll ride on board.
Well, let's take a look here. It was a late move, and all credit to Anderson for seeing it coming and leaving a big enough gap. That was really clean racing there between these two. Just a little wide, might have caught one of those little bollards there on the outside, and that's enough to send you around. And then I give Dominic a lot of credit for being patient here, making sure he rejoined safely. It's not easy to do, but it's often appreciated in sim racing, as well as, of course, the real thing.
So he actually pulled away and will actually remain in 10th spot for now. Nelson Mason jumps up to 9th in the Lamborghini. So, of course, Dominic going to drop a couple spots, but it isn't a huge deal this late in the race. I guess I'd much rather have that problem now and see now Mason go for a slide, and he'll slide off course and have to get himself turned back around. So here comes the 780 right on back by.
Funny how that works. Yeah, this really is, if you're not at the very front of the field, it's a lot about minimizing mistakes and survival. It's hard to keep the focus, I think, in sim racing compared to the real thing. There's a little side-to-side contact there. This has not been an easy lap here for Mason as he goes around again, just trying to get back on track, and I think it's made extra difficult because of the darkness, making sure that you come back on and knowing where cars are relative to you. If you've got somebody on your inside, you might not even know it because of how dark it is around this track.
And we got a battle for 13th place. Here's Ernest De La Cruz and James Pesic in the number 40, who we haven't really talked about a whole lot today. I think we touched on him briefly, but they're going to come across the start-finish line with 12 minutes to go. And Pesic last time by was a little slower than De La Cruz. This time through, though, a 56.5 for De La Cruz and a 57.5. So it looks like Pesic was actually closer last lap, but he did close in the middle of that previous lap and just lost it on the third sector.
Really interesting to keep an eye on this. Pesic, a guy who has high-level experience as an athlete. He played college football for Coe College in Iowa, but now making his focus in auto racing, PF Racing, a family-run team out of Harrisonville, Missouri, which isn't necessarily a hotbed for sports car racing, but they've done a really nice job campaigning Ford Mustang GT4s, and now we see what James can do racing the GT3 Aston Martin here in the virtual world.
Well, not too far behind them. You saw at the back of that shot, there's Brian Heidkotter, who's about to put them a lap down, and Heidkotter continues to expand this lead. It's now 10.5 seconds back to Kenton Cook, but he's just been putting on a show like he did at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. Remember back there, it was on the final lap that a group of cars got together right in front of him between turns 3 and 4, almost lost him the race, and he does have some lap traffic to negotiate before he'll see the checkered flag tonight.
And he had problems with lap traffic. If you go back to last week, too, at Misano, it was trying to make his way up through the field that he had a little mistake, caught a curb wrong, and it sent him into the wall, and he had to nurse a damaged car home to the finish. Ultimately, because he was so fast and was running second at the time of the incident and was well ahead of anybody who was chasing him, he was still able to salvage a top 5 finish. But he certainly knows that it's not over till it's over, and there's plenty of challenge left ahead of him, trying to make his way through the lap traffic and just negotiating his way around this track. We talked about it in the open, haven't really touched on it since, but it's so flat, so much runoff, and now you add the darkness. It's an easy place to lose your references, lose where you are. This onboard shot here gives a really good idea of just that. When you get outside of some of these really well-lit sections, you don't have a ton to base your reference on to know where you are around this circuit and where your braking markers and turn-in points should be.
Another thing we have to kind of keep our eyes on as we go back to the battle for 9th between Gurin and Carl Whitmer in the 22 is also when you have this kind of narrow cone of light protruding from the car, and you kind of lose that peripheral vision, and your eyes use that peripheral vision to kind of use that for speed sensation. So your entire sensation of speed is kind of gone when the sides of your vision are all darkness. You see Carl Whitmer now putting a lot of pressure on the 780.
Yeah, this battle continues. Carl doing a nice job to recover, had that penalty like we mentioned. Looks like he's going to be able to get alongside the Porsche here, and the Porsche has not proven to be super fast going straight. Its strengths around this place have come elsewhere. We know it's a fast car, and we've seen that played out because of the lap times it's capable of, but again, that's GT3 racing. These cars make their speed in different ways. So we'll see what Carl can do. Does he get it clear? It looks like he's got the car still up the inside. Indeed he does, and now finally able to come back down to the inside and complete that pass.
So he goes on through into 9th spot, and Gurner a little bit wide behind him as we now work our way towards the final 8 minutes of this race here at Circuit Paul Ricard. And this is such a cool sight to see. And one of the other things I wanted to go back to, and a couple of cars have this as well, is on board. Take a look at the lighting inside this car. These kind of the UV, the kind of bluish purple LEDs lighting the interior to let the drivers see their controls and see their buttons without really causing their eyes to have to readjust to the light outside of the car.
And if anyone's wondering, yes, this is a very accurate representation of what the real-life GT3 cars look like in the nighttime. Anytime you see onboard shots from some of the night races, I know GT World Challenge Europe has had some sprint races at night at Misano. Of course, you get to some of the long-distance races, part of the Intercontinental GT Challenge, Spa being the most obvious, the 24-hour race there. But Kyalami went into the night last year. Bathurst starts out in darkness. Anyway, anytime you see those onboard shots, you see exactly what Assetto Corsa Competizione is displaying there, and a lot of thought goes into how these displays are put together, the location of the switches, what kind of lighting that you use so they don't prove to be a distraction at night, but also give you the information that you need. There's so much that goes into the design of these GT3 cars that really is designed around creature comfort, increasingly so with some of the later versions of these GT GT3 cars, though. The Lamborghini actually is a great example of that. This that we're riding on board with here. The Evo version of this Huracan has really taken huge strides to making this such an accessible car for the drivers, and it goes beyond just making a fast race car. What the manufacturers have learned is a comfortable race car and an intuitive race car also makes for a fast race car.
The inside of this Huracan GT3 looks like a spaceship. It's super cool looking as Corey Lewis has kind of rebounded to 11th after he had some trouble earlier in the day. You see the windshield a little bit kind of scraped and tattered up from some contact potentially. But you see the 780, that gold car, and it's really pretty tricky to see through this windshield. But if the visibility wasn't bad enough with the darkness, how about having this reflective scratching on the windshield? That's going to be incredibly difficult for Corey to see. But you can see the gold and white number 780 Porsche of Dominic Guerin up the road in 10th.
That is his quarry. That's who he's chasing at this point. Corey just outside of the top 10, running in 11th. 6 minutes to go in the race as we're past 11 o'clock local time in game here at Paul Ricard in southern France. And Corey, such an experienced driver, has tons of experience racing at night, actually, in long-distance races. He won himself a wristwatch at Daytona in the GT Daytona class earlier this year for Paul Miller Racing, and so experienced in Lamborghini machinery as well. Just fast and consistent and plug-and-play for Lamborghini teams, whether it's a Super Trofeo car or the GT3 Huracan.
So making our way through the first sector for Corey Lewis. Wanted to check in because Kyle Marcelli, we haven't talked about him a whole lot today in this number 80 car, but he is currently the leader in the Acura camp right now in the NSX. Currently runs in 7th, right ahead of Kevin Anderson. Marcelli's been quiet today in that Racer's Edge Motorsports car, but quiet and quick. We mentioned earlier that he was kind of taking his time and kind of tiptoeing through the field, but he's done an incredible job of just staying out of trouble, staying on track, and now he sits with a solid top 10 in sight with 5 minutes to go.
This would be his best result through 3 weeks here in GT Rivals. He did not have a good run at Laguna to open the season. Finished 11th, but a quiet 11th going back to last week in virtual Italy at Misano. And right now, as you said, running in 7th. He's got 4 seconds to try and claw into in terms of Kenny Murillo's advantage. Kenny running in 6th right now, just up the road. That's going to be hard to do with the remaining time, but you never know. It does seem like Kenny's car is getting away from him a little bit, and Kyle's a motivated guy. When asked to, he can put down some really fast laps. He was running as a Pro-Am in a Pro-Am combination last year in GT World Challenge America, and consistently was qualifying amongst the very best pros. So he's awfully stout behind the wheel, and he has bonded well with this NSX GT3.
Continues to run inside the top 10. Kenton Cook in this number 59. Well, I don't want to jinx him and give him the commentator curse, Ryan, but this race has gone a lot more smoothly for him. Sits in 2nd. I'm sure he'll be a little bit disappointed it wasn't a race win unless we see something happen to Heidkotter, but stayed out of trouble and no penalties yet for the 59 car with only 4 minutes to go. So a couple laps left for him just to get a clean run and finish inside the top 5 where he probably should have finished the last couple weeks.
Well, he did end up with a 5th at Laguna, but it took a monumental effort to get there. He had those penalties, had some contact on the opening lap, started outside of the front row, but some contact really early on in the first lap of the race set him back big time, and it was quite a drive to get back up to 5th. And like you said, last week did not go according to plan. We talked about the story of his disqualification earlier, not realizing he had a penalty assessed that he had to serve. And I know from speaking to him, he is desperate just to have a clean run, and he's certainly on his way to that at this point. There might be a little disappointment in not picking up a win. All these guys want to win, of course, but given the way his season has played out so far, I think he will be thrilled to have just a clean 60 minutes here with a good result to show for it.
He just got by Udell in the number 25 car and has Mason and Pesic up the road, 1.3 seconds and 5 seconds respectively, so some lap traffic still to deal with. Brian Heidkotter has lap traffic to deal with as well, and that car would be Corey Lewis in the 11th place, number 48 Paul Miller Racing car that's Guerin. So Heidkotter again lapping all the way up to 11th, and he might get up to 10th place, and this just is a testament to the pace that he has had from flag to flag here with 2.5 minutes to go.
He's so good, isn't he? I mean, we've just been marveling at his pace ever since he showed up, kind of last minute for our test race a few weeks ago, which was held here at Paul Ricard. Said he didn't test the setup beforehand. He didn't bother qualifying, just started last, and I think he ended up in 7th or something like that. Just charged through the field, dominated at Laguna, finished 5th like we talked about earlier last week at Misano. Just picture perfect here today. I'm sure that mistake that he readily admitted to last week, getting off track and making contact with the wall, that cost him at least a 2nd place position. He might have had a chance to challenge for the lead late in that race. I'm sure he's happy to put that behind him, and he has been inch perfect here around what is a very, very difficult Paul Ricard circuit. Really impressed, as ever, with what Brian has done.
And right in front of him is the 10th place car, Dominic Urin in the 780, that golden white Porsche. Next time by, we'll be getting the white flag there, as well as the 81 car. Drive through for track limits. That would be the Acura NSX of Shelby Blackstock, who had a good day going and then ended up having issues and now sits 18th. So I'm not sure that that this is going to be a huge hit to his performances. He's already kind of mired down the order a little bit, but still, with a minute left, it kind of stings to get a penalty this late in the race.
It does. It's the old adding insult to injury, isn't it? And he was our early star of this race for sure. Started 10th, was up to 5th, was putting pressure on Kenny Murillo for 4th when he had a penalty earlier in the race, and just has not been able to recover. A real shame for Shelby, who's proven to be a very, very fast guy at the wheel of the NSX, whether it's in Assetto Corsa or racing in GT World Challenge America.
So, looks like Heitconner's working his way through the final sector here. Has a couple of cars to get on by, but it's not over till it's over. I know it says a 17-second gap, but we've seen how quickly those gaps can disappear with a little bit of an issue. But Heitconner's going to come on through, and a couple more corners left before he'll pick up the white flag here at Paul Ricard. And I'm not sure he'll be able to see it, maybe other than the reflection off the headlights of his Nissan GTR and Nismo GT3. So he's going to head onto the front straightaway here, and he'll pick up the white flag from Paul Ricard in round 3 of the 2020 GT Rivals Esports Championship, brought to you by World Challenge, as well as Amazon Web Services through turn. Wow, that was a real dicey, as one of the Ferraris was leaving pit lane.
Yeah, it's never over till it's over. I'm sure that got the heart rate up. That's not what you want to see. And I was about to say, the good news for Brian is I didn't see anybody up ahead of him. And little did we know somebody was going to pop out right next to him. That was too close for comfort, to say the least. It does look like there is a back marker just a little bit up the road there. Not sure if he'll catch him or not. Frankly, he doesn't need to push. 21 seconds his advantage over Kenton Cook at this stage. We drop a little bit further back and take a look at this battle for position here between De La Cruz and Corey Lewis.
Yeah, and the 296 has just went on through the 48 actually to move him up a position, so he is on through, and so move the 296. I've been really impressed with De La Cruz with all the issues that he had earlier in the race. He's done a really good job recovering almost to a top 10.
Yeah, not of his making either. We should point out those problems. At least the second spin for sure. There was a little bit of contact there, and the aggressor in that was penalized. So I think that kind of tells you what you need to know about that. But as far as he's concerned, it's not the result he was looking for. Certainly not the one he was capable of, but just outside the top 10. Not a bad debut here in GT Rivals.
One more sector for Brian Heitconner, and as he did at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, has just put on a clinic at the front of the field. And if someone else wants to challenge him, they got a lot of work to do, Ryan, because he just continues to impress, as we've said. But a couple corners left for the driver in the Nissan GTR as he makes his way around the final lap.
Yes, standing at the top of the presumptive podium as it stands right now. 1st, 5th, and about to add another 1st through 3 races here in GT Rivals. Just a remarkable job. No surprise, an ace in the sim racing world, an ace in the real world as well. Brian Heitconner.
And he gets it done. Round 3 of the 2020 GT Rivals Esports Championship goes to Brian Heitconner. Kenton Cook a long ways back, but for Kenton today, a flawless execution after a couple rounds of penalties that he had to overcome at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. He finally gets a clean race in, although he runs wide there. He's off in the runoff area, has to slow down to give up the time right at the end of the race. Kevin Bone goes on through and takes 2nd place away at the very end of the race. And for Kenton Cook, oh my, I'm sure, that's going to be brutal. Does he lose 4th to Dickerson as well? No, he's up ahead of Dickerson, but Kenton Cook slowing to give up the time, and he's gained a 95-second penalty And just as I was saying that he was going to finish a race without one, gets one at the very end. That is going to drive him insane.
Oh, that's going to eat at him. I know it as we see the fireworks going off. That is brutal. Yikes. Poor Kitten Cook. We'll see where it drops him to. I know he was trying to give the time back, but I don't think it's going to matter. That penalty transitions into a time penalty, and you could see him dropping down the pylon there. Promoting Dakota Dickerson to the podium. Briscoe, the best finisher from Champion Motorsports, in 4th. And at the moment, Kitten in 5th. We'll see if that stands or if Kenny Murillo can get by.
Well, that's pretty brutal, but Kenny Murillo, actually, this penalty should drop him to 9th place again. It looked like it was a track limits violation. He was on the inside of one of the final corners in the last sector, and apex cuts are not really fond upon by either race control or the Assetto Corsa Competizione automatic race control, so that's going to push him way down the order as Kenny Murillo comes on through. He'll finish in 5th. Kyle Marcelli gets promoted to 6th. Kevin Anderson should come home and eventually be 7th here. Yes, he does. Carl Whitmer in the number 22 moves up to 8th, and I think Kenton will finish in the 9th spot now as the rest of the field comes on through. But a disastrous end to what was a solid race for Kenton Cook.
It all comes down to the final corner after 60 minutes of racing. That is absolutely brutal. Still a good result, but what could have been and what nearly was for Kitten Cook. Should have been on the podium. Instead, we'll have to settle for 9th.
So here's a look at the race results. It was Heitcutter that got it done again, and this time it was a 29-second gap with the second place car dropping down with a penalty. Kevin Boehm in 2nd in the CrowdStrike Mercedes platform. He'll drop to P2 in the number 90, and Dakota Dickerson will be the last man standing on the podium in the number 72 Ferrari, Ryan.
Yeah, great job by him. Kind of a quiet run. I don't think we talked about him a whole lot, but a really good finish for Dakota Dickerson in that Ferrari. And then Briscoe, like we said, in 4th, the fastest of the full-time sim racing contingent. And Kenny Murillo, really impressed with him. This was his debut here in GT Rivals. Ran as high as 2nd. Will settle for 5th. I think he can be quite pleased with that and take that and build on it moving forward.
Absolutely. So in just a minute, we're going to talk to our race winner as well as our 2nd and 3rd place drivers, Boehm and Dickerson. So hang tight for just a little bit. We'll get a chance to talk to them here. We want to thank our sponsors again for jumping on board and sponsoring this round of the GT Rivals Esports Championship. Of course, Assetto Corsa Competizione for giving us the platform on which to race. Asus, Republic of Gamers, as well as Tough Gaming for all their support, as well as the giveaways that you've been able to enter for free in the chat below. And of course, Fanatec Sim Lab Champion Motorsports for providing the league and some of the drivers to go up against these world-class racers. Of course, AWS for providing the pathways to the internet for us. CrowdStrike, Pirelli, Rebellion, Total, Optima Battery, Skip Barber Racing School, 511, and of course SRO America for sanctioning all of this this afternoon. So thanks again for joining us. And in just a few short moments, we're going to have some of our winners to talk to. So stay with us. We'll be right back in just a minute. Welcome back live to Assetto Corsa Competizione and the GT Rivals Esports Championship, brought to you by GT World Challenge America. And we got Ryan Marine standing by with your race winner.
Race winner once again for the 2nd time in GT Rivals competition, Brian Heitcutter, driving the Nissan beautiful GTR, and congratulations, Brian, a 2nd win here in the series. And maybe the start wasn't quite the way you were looking for. Started on pole, slipped back a little bit, but ultimately the battle that you had with Kenton early in the race, how did you ultimately make the pass and get by and take the lead from there?
Yeah, it looked like Kenton and I were running quite a bit different levels of downforce. Looked like he had a lot more than me, so he was really strong most places on the track. And in fact, I couldn't get close enough to him for a while to draft down that long back straightaway. But either he had a rough first sector or I had a really good one, and I was able to tuck up underneath heading onto that back straightaway. And my car was pretty trimmed out for max speed, so it ended up making the pass look easy in the end, but it wasn't easy catching up to him in the first place.
You mentioned the decision to go with a low downforce setting. Take us through the decision-making process. How did you identify that was the way to go? Because the flip side of it, of course, is the car is going to be a bit harder to hold on to when you get to the twisty bits.
Yeah, it's always a give and take. I don't know. I just kind of figured with that long straightaway, as long as I could make the car handle decently in the corners, I'd opt for a low downforce setup just to have a better shot with a track position, both attacking and or defending. So I don't know. For me, it seemed kind of like the obvious choice. Is, like I said, as long as you could get the car working in the slower corners.
We had the added element, of course, of racing under the lights here in week number 3. What was it like visibility-wise as we got towards the end of that race and you were starting to come through some of the back markers?
I love night racing. I have some experience doing it in the real world, and there's something about night racing that's just really special. So I always look forward to it. There's kind of an eerie peacefulness about it, even though there's the fury of racing going on at the same time. I love it.
I think you had a pretty busy day with the SRO having esports offerings both in Europe and the States. Wow, what kind of a balancing act was it for you preparing for a couple of events?
I prioritized this event. The other SRO series, qualifying's at 2 in the morning my time, and the race is at 5 in the morning. So I knew I wasn't going to be at my best anyway. But just this week, I really wanted to prioritize this race after the last race with GT Rivals. So it was good to be back on top here. Maybe next time in the other series, I can have a little bit better luck and a little bit more speed. We'll see. But I'm really happy with prioritizing GT Rivals. I don't want to let that become a lower priority.
It's paying off so far. Well, lastly, how soon do you turn your attention to week 4?
I'll give it a few days, maybe Thursday, Friday, something like that.
Sounds good. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us post-race. Congratulations on your second win of the GT Rivals Series, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Thank you.
Going to move on now to our second place finisher, Kevin Bowman, the Crown Strike number 90 Mercedes AMG GT3. Kevin, a second place, maybe a bit of a surprise after running in third all the way up to the white flag, but Kenton Cook with a penalty there at the very end. You finished P2, a solid race, very little drama today. Talk to me about your run into the darkness here at Paul Ricard.
Yeah, I mean, the night race adds a whole new level of difficulty. It's more about how the kind of temperature changes through the whole race, more so than the light changing for me. You kind of have to compromise the setup a little bit to either be good at the beginning or good at the end. And in the end, my choice was a little bit wrong, but yeah, it was great to kind of come across the last lap and saw that I'd caught Kenton quite a bit, and it was pretty obvious that he had something going on. So I tried to put my head down and run the best lap that I could to get as close as I could, and it turned out I kind of on the back straight I caught him pretty close, and fortunately got by him pretty quick, and then made it to the finish.
So I want to talk a little bit about the traffic out there today, because there was a little bit of lap traffic, and we saw this kind of be an issue in the test race a few weeks ago. But walk me through the challenges of passing at Paul Ricard on this surface. It's very flat, but also very challenging as well because of how dark it can be and how your visibility decreases over the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge because you can set up your car a lot different ways. So some of the cars are going to be really good in the tight, twisty sections and slower on the straight. And you can set the car up to be a rocket ship down the straight if you want, and that'll make you a little slower in the turn. So it sort of depends on what combination your car is versus the guy you're trying to pass. So there were a couple instances in the race where the cars were a lot faster down the straight than I was, and even in a draft I couldn't quite get by, so that always makes it a little bit more risky to pass them, but fortunately we made lots of clean passes and didn't have any issues.
Kevin Bowman, the number 90 Crown Strike Mercedes, finishes in P2 tonight. Kevin, thanks for talking.
Thanks, guys.
It was Dakota Dickerson's Ferrari 488 GT3 and the number 72 that came home on the last step of the podium. Dakota, a really good race for you. Climbed up the order and finished inside the top 5 like you did in the first round back at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. And a nice rebound from last week at Misano. Walk us through your night, charging up inside the top 5.
Yeah, it was a really fun race. I had a kind of a bad opening lap there, battling with Nico, went off and I think fell back to 10th and just kind of slowly worked our way back up, and was surprised at the end when we actually got on the podium because I didn't realize that we were running that spot. I guess Kenton might have ran out of fuel because Brian got that extra lap there at the end. But yeah, nevertheless, it was an awesome race. I didn't think I was actually going to be finishing well because like the first 10 laps of the race, I didn't know how to turn my lights on for the night conditions, so I had my Twitch chat working with me on that. But yeah, all in all, really fun. Can't thank SRO America enough for putting this on.
I want to know a little bit about the differences between cars this afternoon. Obviously, this straightaway, one of the longest in the series, and we saw the differences of the different vehicles kind of show themselves a little bit today. Talk to me about your Ferrari platform and how it compared to some of the others out there in the different sectors of Circuit Paul Ricard.
For sure. I mean, I'm pretty new to the Assetto Corsa platform, but it seems like the Ferrari in general is a little bit slower on top end, but is very nimble in the direction change and the slower speed corners. So coming to this track, I basically took out as much rear wing as I could for the long back straight, tried to manage it with some mechanical changes. So I think maybe there was a bit of a compromise there, especially in the night conditions when the track temps came down. It seemed like the balance moved to the front for the Ferrari, so got to try and do those practice races before the actual race next time. But all in all, I think the Ferrari platform is very strong. When I first joined the series, I did it because it didn't seem like very many other people were running the Ferrari, and I think I've gotten quite lucky because it seems like a very strong car no matter where we go, whether that's kind of a track with a lot of elevation change and long duration corners, or a track like this with very long straightaways.
Dakota, thanks for talking to us. Congratulations. A really strong run in the top 5 tonight in your Ferrari.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we wanted to kind of touch on one more thing before we start to wrap things up here, Ryan. We are hearing that Kent Cook potentially ran out of fuel and to try to get to the end of the race, cut through that final sector, and that's what gave him the penalty and why he was coasting so slowly to the line. It wasn't to give up the time. The penalty, you can't give it up. Once you get it, you get it, but he was just trying to coast to the finish, so a slight miscalculation there. It's going to cost him 7 spots. He finishes 9th.
And it sounds like perhaps the root of that was just the way that the timing worked out, and maybe the leader, Brian Highcotter, got an extra lap than many in the field were expecting, and that can really cost you if you calculated your fuel based on the expectation of running a certain number of laps. I can't say for sure that that's what happened, but I have seen a couple folks in the chat speculating that that might have been the case. So that certainly hurts. I don't know if the penalty then proved as costly as the fuel situation, or if they compounded one another. I have to go back and take a look at how that played out. But nevertheless, not the result that Kenton was hoping for. He really had a good run today, and it's a shame that it wasn't. It didn't result in a better result when you look at the final standings.
Well, it looks like we also have Keith Briscoe standing by, our top finishing champion motorsports driver, and Ryan standing by.
Hey, Keith, thank you so much for joining us here. 4th today and tops from the Champion Motorsports stable. You happy with that performance, or were you expecting more?
I'm super happy. I don't think I was expecting any more. I was just glad to be in that spot. It was a little dicey at the beginning. I got probably the best qualifying lap I've ever done. Put me in a good spot. It was a little crazy at the beginning, dropped back, and huge thanks to a guy named Brandon Olay, who was my spotter and helped me get through those first few laps and stay calm to the end.
How crucial was it to have a spotter, not just for those first few laps, but also as we got into the darkness when visibility starts to wane?
You know, Brandon offered to be my spotter at Laguna, and I paid the price for passing that time. So I took him up this time, and it was a huge help. He definitely kept me calm, which you know, you really need when you're going for 60 minutes against these kind of guys.
We don't see a lot of Audis in the field. You obviously were running one and showing just what they're capable of. Were you surprised there weren't more Audis running here at Paul Ricard?
You know, I've been part of the series here for the last couple of weeks and watching who's driving what. Looks like someone kind of moved out of the Audi. Not sure why. I guess I don't know. I mean, it's a great car. A lot of guys like this car. It's a little tricky. Sometimes folks find that can bite you, but I've had a little help from some of the other guys in CMS to let me get a hold of it.
And finally, what is the significance of being the top driver out of the CMS stable?
Well, I mean, it's you know, some bragging rights, I suppose. But I mean, the fact is, we're all proud of each other, and to see our virtual buddies kind of racing against these pros, you know, it just feels really good. I know, or hoping that this kind of puts me in maybe the running to be in that final race. But we'll just have to see how it goes.
Awesome. Well, hey, congratulations. A great run today. Great to have you in the field, and we do hope to see you in a future GT Rivals event down the road.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate what you do.
All right, so we're going to wrap up here and get set for our next round, Ryan Marine, which will be held in Belgium at the amazing Spa-Francorchamps. So that's going to be a spectacular event. I think that's a racetrack that a lot of drivers in the sports car racing arena are familiar with, and it's going to be a nice return to home for some of the tracks. You know, of course, Mazzano and Paul Ricard, very well known in their respective areas, but I think Spa is known internationally as one of the most spectacular racetracks in the world.
One of the most common answers to the question of what is your favorite track that I get is Spa, 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 Spa. And I got to go there last year for the first time for the Total 24 Hours of Spa, and I get it. It is phenomenal. TV doesn't do it justice. Simulations don't do it justice. It is just an amazing piece of asphalt. I loved my experience there. Can't wait to see what the cars and stars of SRO America are going to do when they race there next week, and it's going to be a blast. It sets up for great racing, some fantastic corners, some iconic scenes, just a beautiful setting for racing as well, and I think we're in store for another great race as we look ahead to round 4.
Absolutely. Of course, next week will be the Total 60 minutes of Spa, and maybe the forecast looking a little bit, maybe a little bit rainy out there. We're going to see how it looks next week, so keep your eye out right here on the GT World Challenge, the GT World YouTube channel, the GT World Challenge America Facebook page, as well as on Twitter and Twitch. And again, make sure that if you have not already entered the giveaway for Asus, Skip Barber, and Assetto Corsa Competizione, make sure you enter that in the chat below. And again, we're going to join you next week at Spa for our 4th round of the 2020 season of the GT Rivals Esports Championship. Again, my name is Kyle Heyer, joined by Ryan Marine from GT World Challenge America. We'll see you next Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you later.